What's happening, everybody? Justin, Bridgewater's finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter, fueled as always by the incredible folks at NerdTees, and welcome to week 4 of my weekly CFL football pick show for the 2022 CFL season. A CFL season that just keeps rolling out the bangers and rolling out the winning picks for yours truly. Another monster week in the double digits in week 3 overall. 4-0 straight up for a third consecutive week. Have not gotten a single game wrong straight up this season. 12-0 through 3 weeks. Against the spread, 3-1. On the totals, 3-1. 10-2 in week 3. It's 83% any way you slice it, and that's where we're at for the season as well. 12-0 straight up, 10-2 against the spread so far this year, 8-4 on the totals. Look, we're even 2 out of 3 ain't bad on the totals, which for me is unbelievable. 30-6 on the CFL season so far. Look, this run will ultimately eventually come to an end. Who knows, it might happen this week. All runs come to an end. There will be valleys. That's why you appreciate the peaks even more. We're at the biggest peak that we have ever been at with this show. It feels incredible. We're going to try to keep going with this as long as we possibly can. Enjoy this ride with me. CFL Fantasy in week 3 did take a bit of a step back from week 2, but it was still a solid outing. 70.7 points in week 3 in CFL Fantasy. That was propelled by my co-MVPs from week 3, and honestly, I couldn't really make a decision between the two of them because they put up the exact same number of points. It was Hamilton wide receiver Tim White and Lions wide receiver Keon Hatcher. So Tim White goes 6 catches for 78 yards. Keon Hatcher goes 7 catches for 68 yards. They both wind up with exactly 13.8 points. Couldn't rightfully give it to either one of them over the other, so we got some co-MVPs in week 3 in CFL Fantasy. Brought in the 70.7 points, 232.2 so far on the season, which is good for now 21st place in the official Atlantic Schooners CFL Fantasy Football League. I did move up 3 spots in the standings from last week, so I can't argue with it too much. The leader in that league has 313.4, which means I did actually lose ground on first place this week by about 7.9 points, so just under 8 points. I trail first place by a little over 81. I gained very marginally on 10th place, less than a full point. I trail 10th now by 36.3 points, but I really made up ground on 20th because obviously I'm in 21st, so I'm staring right behind them. Only trail 20th by 6.7 points now, so I gained by about 3 points over last week. I'm going to present you my lineup for week 4 with confidence this week, the understanding that the lineup's probably not going to change too much unless there's an injury that comes out of nowhere that I don't see. So my week 4 CFL Fantasy Football lineup is right in front of your eyes right now. And I got to tell you, coming into this week, I really took a good hard look at Jeremiah Masoli and stacking him up with Jalen Ackland. They have really performed thus far on the season against obviously one of the elite defenses in Canadian football. I couldn't make the money work out. Between the two of them, it's about 17,000, whereas with who I currently have and stacking him with one of his better wide receivers, it's like 14. So it's the difference between being able to play a defense this week and not being able to play a defense this week. So I did opt to take the stack of Dane Evans and Steven Dunbar with the Hamilton Ticats. I think they have a good matchup this week. I think the vast majority of their offense comes through the air. So I feel like even though Dane has struggled early in the season, I still feel like that's a good stack. We're going to run back with Jamal Morrow and Brady Oliveira as the running backs. The running back market is really, really thin right now. Don Jackson has not played this year. William Stanback is probably out for the season. Kadeem Carey's on bye. So the running back marketplace is awfully thin right now. I'm supplementing Steven Dunbar with Kyan Schaefer-Baker one more time as my wide receiver 2. He has delivered so far this year. He is a focal point of that Riders offense. And Keon Hatcher, same deal. He's one of the best value plays in CFL fantasy football, so I'm sticking with him in my lineup this week and grabbing that Hamilton Ticats defense because, look, Edmonton had probably their best offensive game of the season last week, and it was still only so much. So I do like that Ticats defense at minimum money. Our Week 4 slate of games looks like this. The Calgary Stampeders, as I mentioned, are the team that's on the bye this week. So no Kadeem Carey, no Bo Levi Mitchell, no Kamar Jordan in fantasy. We do have the BC Lions traveling to Ottawa to take on the REDBLACKS. We've got Edmonton in Hamilton taking on the Ticats. Montreal is in Saskatchewan, rematch of last week, taking on the Riders at Mosaic Stadium. And the Winnipeg Blue Bombers hit the road to go to Toronto and take on the Argos. So we're going to start things off with that BC-Ottawa matchup. The Lions moved their record to 2-0 last week, a beatdown of the Toronto Argos, 44-3 against Toronto. Nathan Rourke setting the all-time single-game passing yards record by a Canadian quarterback, 436 yards passing in that game, a monster performance for Nathan Rourke. He also had 4 touchdowns that went to 3 different receivers. So you're looking at 2 touchdowns to Dominique Rhymes, who went off 8 catches for $143 through the air. Touchdown to Javon Catoy, and a touchdown to Brian Burnham, who is now injured. I believe he's got broken ribs. He's going to be out multiple weeks. Also, shout out the fullback position, that powerhouse fullback position. David Mackey, Canadian fullback, 16 carries, 90 yards, and a rush touchdown. We all knew James Butler wasn't coming into this game at 100%. David Mackey picked up the slack and had a massive performance for BC. Another Canadian defensive lineman. This is like Team Canada here for BC. Canadian defensive lineman David Menard. He had an excellent performance on the D-line there for the Lions. 2 sacks in this game, a forced fumble, recovered that fumble himself. He led a defense that only gave up 262 yards to the Argos in that game. 5 turnovers they forced. They had 4 sacks against the quarterbacks. It was just a great top-down performance. They possessed the ball for 40 minutes. It was unbelievable. The REDBLACKS dropped their opening 2 games of the season to the back-to-back defending Grey Cup champion Winnipeg Blue Bombers, so Ottawa sits at 0-2, but they are coming into this game fresh off of their bye. 2 weeks ago, they did drop that 19-12 game against Winnipeg. That game was in Ottawa, so it's back-to-back home games here for the REDBLACKS. It was 2 great efforts against the back-to-back champs. Now they get to go play BC. So it's bad luck Brian, but make it CFL. You start the season having to play the back-to-back defending champs twice, then you get an early bye week, and then you have to play BC, who's the hottest team in the CFL. So Ottawa has nothing breaking in their direction. But speaking of that game 2 weeks ago, the REDBLACKS held a lead at halftime. They went into the half with a lead in this game and were 10 yards short from adding another touchdown right at the end of the first half. That's a 16-7 game heading into the third quarter against the Grey Cup champions. Is that a game destined for overtime? I mean, the Winnipeg ultimately wound up scoring 19 points in total. If Ottawa converts 1 extra field goal, that game's in overtime and anything can happen. So when I talk about how close those 2 games were against Winnipeg of all teams, that's what I mean. Those were 2 exceptionally tight football games. Shout out to running back Devontae Williams, who was a nice fill-in for William Powell here in those first 2 games of the season for Ottawa. 12 carries, 85 yards rushing in that second game. He also had 5 receivers, did the REDBLACKS, that had at least 40 receiving yards. So Masoli moving the ball around very well. That's why I considered him in fantasy this week. It's not one receiver. It's the way that you can spread the ball around, although Ackland's been pretty darn good. The defense did take 8 penalties for 81 yards. That's just the defense. So that's obviously a problem that gives the offense extra opportunities. That obviously led to some Winnipeg points over the course of those 2 games. The defensive penalties have to be cleaned up. Based on their performances in the first 2 games, the REDBLACKS deserve better than what their schedule has given to them. Again, Winnipeg 2 straight games, early bye, hottest team in the league. They deserve better than that. But they proved in those 2 games they can hang with the best teams in football. And the Lions do have to do a Riders this week. Remember what happened with the Riders last week? They had to come to Montreal, play 2 games in 5 days, travel essentially across the country in order to do it. There were a lot of things that were going against the Riders in that game, and as it turned out, the Riders got blown out. BC basically has to do the same thing. It's not back-to-back road games for BC, but this is BC's first road game on the season. It's going to be 2 games in 5 days. They basically have to cross the country to do it. Do you want me to do it? Because I think I'm going to do it. I'm going to take the Ottawa REDBLACKS to upset the BC Lions in week 4, starting the week off with a bang. Another big upset for the second consecutive week. I've got Ottawa beating the BC Lions. Look, I have to see how BC is going to play on the road. We know they're an exceptionally good home team. We talked about that right from the beginning of the season. How are they going to play? How is this team going to play on the road? How is the loss of Brian Burnham going to impact this team on the road? They've got a lot of weapons. I mean, look, they got Lucky Whitehead, they got Javon Catoy, they've got Keon Hatcher. James Butler will assume will be a lot closer to being healthy. Like, they've got weapons. It's not a lack of weapons, but how is the team going to respond? This REDBLACKS team is underrated. I'm taking them in the upset win. Ottawa beats BC. So against the spread, the Lions are 3.5-point favorites on the road in Ottawa. I like Ottawa to win the game outright, so give me the 3.5 points there on the REDBLACKS. Total in the game set at 47.5. I think this game's going to be a shootout. All the offensive weapons on both sides here. 2 really good quarterbacks. Masoli played well in both of those games, threw for a lot of yardage. I think we're going to see some fireworks in this game. I'm going to go over on this one. Let's go over 47.5 points in Ottawa, BC. We're going to go REDBLACKS 34, BC Lions 27. Ottawa gets their first win of the year, an upset win against BC. We're going to go to Hamilton next for the battle of 2 0-3 teams early on in the CFL. The only 2 0-3 teams in the CFL, so one of them is going to get off the schneid. We got the Edmonton Elks in Hamilton taking on the Ticats. Edmonton, obviously, losers of 3 straight games. This is also back-to-back road games for the Elks, who lost in Calgary 30-23 last week. But even though they did lose, the Elks, if you put the Elks on a graph, the Elks are doing this. It ain't fast, but they're going in this direction. The Elks are actually trending upwards. As a matter of fact, in that game in Calgary against the Stampeders, Battle of Alberta, a team that I think is pretty darn good, the Elks held a lead in this game until like the dying seconds of the third quarter. And at the end of this game, it came down to having to try to convert an onside kick. That's how close this game was. In the dying seconds of the game, if the Elks managed to convert an onside kick, they've got the ball again. They got a chance to tie this thing up. That's how close that game was last week. So again, it ain't fast, but they're going in the right direction. It was Nick Arbuckle's best game of the season, although so far this year that's really not saying all that much, but it was a game that he kept his touchdowns and his turnovers even money. It was 1 touchdown and 1 pick. So I personally think it was his best game of the season. We saw more James Wilder, a little bit more. He touched the ball 15 times, had 79 all-purpose yards. There's nothing wrong with that at all. Let's keep going in that direction and maybe get him the ball 20 times in a game. Manny Arsenault goes over 100 yards, scores a receiving touchdown, was a big part of their offense, a big part of the pass game. Manny Arsenault, great game for him. We still just need to see more from them on the defensive side. They gave up 437 yards against. They only had 1 pass knockdown. They did force a fumble, but when you're giving up that much in yardage, you have to have big splash plays. You have to generate turnovers. They didn't do it. The Ticats also 0-3 on the season, coming off of that 26-12 loss in Winnipeg against the Bombers. And look, it was the 3rd straight game. It is officially a trend. The 3rd straight game where the Ticats not only get outscored in the second half, but get really thoroughly outplayed on both sides of the ball. They had a brief, 2-minute lead in the second quarter. And then you get into the second half, and that wound up being it. Second half scoring for the Ticats so far on the year now, being outscored 66-19. So more than 3 times what they're generating on offense. In fact, in the second half of that game last week for Hamilton, they were outscored 12-3. generated just 72 yards of total offense. They punted the ball twice. Dane Evans threw 2 interceptions, including one, a pick six to Willie Jefferson that put points on the board for the other team. They also had a field goal miss, and this, we got to start talking about this a little bit. Michael Domigala, who's a national kicker, I think Domigala's a good kicker. He's missed 4 kicks already this season, including 1 extra point. And I understand. Look, I don't have to be in those pressure situations. I get it. I understand. But we're going to have to start talking about this because he was only, I think, 75% on his, or 70% on his kicks last year. So this is a guy that if you're going to be the guy, you can't be missing that many kicks this early in the season. So got to keep an eye on him for sure. Like I talked about, Dane Evans has struggled in relative terms this season. He's got 4 touchdowns, but he's thrown 2 interceptions in all 3 games. 2 picks, 2 picks, 2 picks. That's not going to be good enough. What are you trending towards? Like 30-some interceptions in the run of a season? That's not going to work. There's no threat on this team to run until Don Jackson is ready to get back into the game. That could very well be this week. I feel like everyone is banking on the Ticats being better than what they are, what they've shown us through these first 3 games that they are. And they're probably not acknowledging that the Elks are better than what we thought they were in week 1 after they got blown out by the Lions. So I think public perception of this game is very, very backwards. What I am going to do is this. I am going to take the Ticats to win this game because if you put these 2 defenses in front of me, I trust one. I don't really trust the other one yet. So I'm going to lean on the Ticats defense. I think they get the job done. I'm going to take Hamilton to beat Edmonton in Hamilton. However, against the spread, Hamilton's laying 6.5 points here as the favorite. No. I don't know how anyone could lay these points on Hamilton with any amount of confidence whatsoever. So, no, I'm going to take the points with the Edmonton Elks. They could win this game outright. So I'm more than happy to take 6.5 points against the spread. Total in the game set at 46.5 points. These are 2 of the lower scoring teams in the CFL. Somebody's defense is going to step up and win this game. I think it's going to be Hamilton's. I'm going to stick under on this total where it's kind of a middle 40. We're going to stay under 46.5 points in Hamilton, Edmonton. Let's go Ticats 21, Elks 16. Hamilton gets the win. Elks cover against the spread for the 2nd week in a row. We're at the halfway point of the picks, folks, and as we do every week, I'm going to take the opportunity to shout out my great friends and sponsors at Nerd Tees. Ladies and gentlemen, nerdtees.ca is where you need to go for dozens and dozens. Sorry, I just punched my laptop there. Dozens and dozens of incredible loose leaf tea blends and accessories, just like what I'm drinking today. Today's blend is an old staple, probably my favorite of all time, which is the watermelon oolong. And I tell you something, folks, when you open these bags of tea, they smell incredible. I have never had a bag of watermelon oolong smell as good as the one that I just opened 25 minutes ago. Nerdtees.ca, that's where you need to go, and BW Finest is the promo code that you need to use in order to save 15% on any order, anything that you want to get from nerdtees.ca. You're also going to get free shipping in Canada on any order over $100, which is an excellent value, especially with the way shipping rates and everything else is increasing nowadays. Make sure also, if you're one of my American viewers, don't worry, you do get a great conversion rate on the US dollar. Nerdtees.ca, promo code BWFinest, save you 15%, get you free shipping, find yourself something to love, or find someone you love something to love. You can do it on nerdtees.ca, and it's more reliable than the pitch that I just did. All right, back half of the week. Let's get into it. We're going to go to Saskatchewan now. The Montreal Alouettes traveling to Saskatchewan to take on the Riders. This, of course, being a rematch of a game last week. Alouettes winning their first game of the season, going to 1-2 on the season with a 37-13 drubbing of these Saskatchewan Roughriders in Montreal. Of course, we talked about everything Sasky had going against them heading into that game. Second game in 5 days, back-to-back road games, crossing the country, injuries that they're dealing with, all kinds of things that were going against them, and boy, did it ever show. And it was right from the opening kick return. Chandler Worthy takes the first kick, 88 yards, back to the house, puts Montreal up immediately, set the tone for the rest of the game. Saski scored just one time on their first 7 possessions. The Owls were dominant. There was no facet of this game other than time of possession, which they won by, I think, like 3 minutes or something. There's no facet of this game where the Owls were not the better team. I want to shout out Kion Julian Grant scoring his first CFL touchdown of his career in that game last week. Big shout out to him. He had himself a pretty good game. Let's see if he can replicate that performance, especially if Jake Weineke is out of the game again. On the Riders side, obviously plenty went wrong in what was clearly their weakest game of the season so far. Cody Fajardo was sloppy. He only completed 61% of his passes for $191 throwing the ball and had 2 interceptions, but say touchdowns, was not touchdowns. There was no run game to speak of. They carried the ball 14 times for 54 yards as a team. They really bottled up Jamal Morrow, did the Alouettes. I don't think that'll happen 2 weeks in a row. That's why he's in my fantasy this week. The offensive line allowed 8 quarterback sacks. Don't really have to say much more than that. But what the hell, I will anyway. The defense allowing 19 yards per play on first down. Let me say that again. Saskatchewan's defense allowed 19 yards per play on first down. They did not generate any turnovers against the Alouettes. They had 3 turnovers towards the Alouettes for their own part. Just 1 pass knockdown in the secondary. The defense took 6 penalties for 41 yards, part of 11 for 106 as a team. Literally nothing went right. It was almost a burn the game tape situation. Now, in saying that, if the Riders go home to Mosaic Stadium and have a repeat performance of what they just put on the CFL football field last week, I think their fans might set the seats on fire. So I'm not going to bank on that happening. I think this is a big bounce back performance here for the Riders. Matter of fact, I think the Riders come home and get a W here. Let's take Saskatchewan over the Montreal Alouettes. I don't see the Als as a beat the Riders 2 weeks in a row type of team, so we're going to grab Saski here to beat Montreal. On the line, Saski's laying 3.5 points here as a home favorite. This number is coming down. It was originally 4.5 points, so it's dropped a whole point just since this morning. And look, their only other home game so far this year was a 17-point win in week 1 against Hamilton. They are fully rested and they are angry. They can't not be angry after the garbage performance they put on tape last week. So I have no problem here buying this half point. I was going to lay the 4.5 if the number would have stuck there. So I'm more than happy laying 3.5 points here on the Riders at home. Total in the game set at 46.5. They just put up 50 last week. Both of these teams, I think, should be good for 20-plus points in this matchup. So you give me a middling 40 like that, I think I got to go over on it. We're going to go over 46.5 points in Saskatchewan, Montreal. Let's go Riders 28, Alouettes 23. High-scoring affair, close game. I think the Riders get their revenge and get it done. And the last game of week 4 sees the Winnipeg Blue Bombers hit the road going to Toronto to take on the Argonauts. Now, Winnipeg 3-0 on the season. What else is new? Coming off a 26-12 win last week at home against the Ticats, which I thought was the most assuring and never in doubt win of the Bombers season so far. Both of those games against Ottawa were less certain that they were going to win those games as they were playing out than the game last week against Hamilton. Matter of fact, the Bombers were down in this game. They were down 9-7 late in the second quarter. Even at that point, there was no point that it really felt like the Bombers were in trouble. We finally got to see shades of the good Oliveira last week. He carried the ball 15 times for 56 yards and a touchdown, so almost 4 yards per carry, and he found the end zone. Willie Jefferson, what a monster, and such a great performance last week. 3 tackles, had a quarterback sack, had that pick 6 that he rumbled back 30 yards to the house off of Dane Evans. That's what really sealed this football game. But again, at no point did it feel like Winnipeg was not in control of that game. So I would argue that it was probably their best performance of the season so far. On the opposite side of the coin is the Toronto Argonauts with, they've only played 2 games, but clearly their worst game of the season, losing 44-3 in BC to the phenom Nathan Rourke and the BC Lions. And boy, was I wrong about this Argos team, I think. That game was a lot closer to the bad Argos that we saw in 2018 and 2019 than the good Argos that we saw for most of last season. The Toronto Argos possessed the ball in that football game for 19 minutes and 52 seconds. I'll take this opportunity to remind you that football games are 60 minutes long. The Toronto Argos turned the ball over 5 times in that game. I will remind you, turnovers are bad. The Toronto Argos allowed the BC Lions to score points on all but 4 of the Lions' offensive possessions, and one of those 4 possessions was their last possession of the game, where I think they just kneeled the ball 3 times. Let me remind you, the other team's scoring is very not good. McLeod Bethel-Thompson did stretch the football. He stretched the football down the field. Now, the game script forced him to do that, but he did have 4 receivers that had at least 10 yards per catch. Tavares Daniels leading the way, 3 catches for 60 yards. Not a bad performance from a guy that's not supposed to be your number 1 receiver. But from the top down, you're not winning a football game with that kind of effort. I don't think I've ever had my confidence in a team be shaken so quickly and fall so fast as I have with this Argos team. I genuinely, and I make no excuses for this. This is how I felt opening the season. I thought on paper the Toronto Argos were the best team in the CFL. I thought they had the potential to be that team. They didn't really look that way in week 1, but I thought, or not week 1, game 1, but like, it's first game jitters, it's fine. After last week, my God, and I don't think things are going to get a ton better this week. Now, they're not going to lose 44-3 this week. It's just not going to happen. First of all, Winnipeg's not that team offensively, but like that kind of back-to-back performance is just not going to happen. The Argos are at home, but it's Winnipeg. We're going to take the Bombers here on the road in Toronto to beat the Argos. On the line, Winnipeg laying 4.5 points here as a road favorite. Now, I didn't buy the half point against Toronto last week, and obviously got spanked for that. So let's go the other way this time. We're going to go ahead and lay the 4.5 points on the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. It's not a huge amount to lay. I think it's going to be a low-scoring game, but still, the Argos' offensive ceiling right now is not that great, even though they got fantastic football players. That's also going to allow me to stay under on this very low number for a second week in a row. The total is 42.5 points. We're going to stay under. The Argos are the lowest scoring team in the CFL by average, and they're taking on the Winnipeg Blue Bombers defense. Under. Unless the Bombers score 30, which I don't think they're going to, and even if the Bombers score 30, I might be willing to still stay under on this number because that Bombers defense is just so damn good. But we're going to stay under 42.5 points in Winnipeg, Toronto. Let's go Bombers 23, Argos 10. There you go, folks. Those are your picks for week 4 in the CFL. We'll go over them here with you one more time. I've got the Ottawa REDBLACKS upsetting the BC Lions in Ottawa 34-27. I'm taking plus 3.5 on the REDBLACKS in a game that goes over 47.5 points. I got the Hamilton Ticats beating the Edmonton Elks in Hamilton 21-16, which means I'm taking the 6.5 points on the Edmonton Elks as the underdog here in a game that stays under 46.5. I got the Saskatchewan Roughriders at home beating the Montreal Alouettes 28-23. I'm laying 3.5 points on the Roughriders in a game that goes over 46.5. And I like the Winnipeg Blue Bombers to beat the Toronto Argonauts in Toronto 23-10, which means I am laying minus 4.5 on the Winnipeg Blue Bombers in a game that stays under 42.5 points. The way I think this is gonna play out in terms of me versus the public, I think the public is going to be very against how I feel about the first two games, and I think are going to be mostly in line with the back half of those games. It'll be really interesting to find that out. What do you think? How do you think the CFL season has gone so far? Are you enjoying this little ride that we have been on with the just fantastic accuracy of the picks? How do you feel about my picks this week? What are your picks for this week? Let me know all of that in the comments section below. That's it for me, Justin, Bridgewater's Finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter, fueled as always by the incredible folks at Nerd Tees. Week 4 CFL is in the books. Thank you so much for watching. We will see you again next week for week number 5.